Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimist. I am State Senator Tiara Mack, and I'm joined by attorney Rachel Cohen. And this episode is all about the upcoming elections. We are recording on Thursday, October 30th. I had to double check the date to see what time it actually is. Too much going on. But one of the things that has been not sitting well with my soul and my spirit, and probably the spirit of every civil rights activist who fought for voting rights in this country, both alive and no longer with us, but their legacy continues, is the DOJ's decision to send federal election watchers to both California and New Jersey ahead of their elections. This is not only a concerning development in the continuous fight to wrestle power from the American people in the form of fair and free elections, but this is another direct assault on our election system. We should all be paying attention. Next year for the midterms, the Republican Party has already got their little tiny grabby hands the size of infants onto state election maps. They have started a gerrymandering war that started with Texas but is not ended there. Several states have already gotten into the mix. A few updates. California, as you all probably have heard, are doing an election for Prop 50 that will be coming up on November 4th. Early voting has already started. If you are in California and watching, remember to send in your mail ballots and vote early. But Rachel, I am curious to hear what your thoughts are on this continuous attack leading up to the midterms, and how much Americans should actually be paying attention to the continuous attacks on this idea that we have free and fair elections. That idea should already be challenged in most people's minds, but this concerning update about federal election watchers in California and New Jersey for their upcoming votes on the maps and for a highly contested governor's race that could also set the stage for next year's midterms does not sit well with my spirit. And I'm curious what is coming up in your mind as we are heading into the election season.
Imagine if it cut to me and I was like, I think it's fine. No, it's good. The government's here to protect us. I will say I had a conversation with someone recently. You will guess something that they and I had in common that they don't have in common with you. I was a white person, obviously, who was saying that their parents really do seem to still fall into the category of the government isn't going to do anything malicious. They're not going to do anything bad to me. And so I think that while I am deeply troubled by pretty much everything that's happening all of the time, I do think it's worth naming, and probably most of our viewers are as well, when we leave the internet and return to our everyday lives, I think it is important to remember that there are a lot of people that are just still not quite as activated as we would like them to be, and not as distrustworthy of Donald Trump's government as we would like them to be. And thinking about the kind of messaging that we're using when we talk to them about comparisons between other countries that do not have the same degree of stability and fair and free elections and what we're seeing in the United States. I think one of the most compelling kind of blog posts that I saw at any point during Trump 2.0 was early on, where someone wrote and said that how would we be covering this in a less affluent country if it were happening there? Let's lay out everything that's happening here and pretend that this is happening not in a Western country, but instead in the kind of place that Westerners consume media and say, oh, that's not a very stable democracy. I think I have 2, maybe 3 points that I want to make before I kick it back to you, because I'm interested in your perspective as an elected. But the first is a gentle kind of push, which is this idea that the gerrymandering war, the very open one that we've seen in Texas, started in Texas. But I think important to contextualize for our viewers, for ourselves always, that one of the reasons that we're here in the first place is because we have allowed this country to politically gerrymander for the parties that control the state legislatures at the time of the census to draw maps for my entire life. And so we've already had so much gerrymandering where people are in these weirdly drawn maps to dilute their votes for a very long time. And I think that we see it. I would be remiss in this moment, here's number 2, not to talk about our grassroots policy platform, American Demands, because one of the things that we're really focused on, because we think that it is necessary to create any type of lasting change in this country, is adjustments that make gerrymandering impossible. And that is really challenging in some ways. Like, you can't pass a law that just says, oh, you can't draw maps a certain way because of legal restrictions. But there are other forms of elections that can be done by congressional action, like proportional representation, where instead of voting for one person in a district, you have a larger district and you're voting for 3 or 4 people, or you're voting for a slate, or you're voting for a party, which is very common in other countries, particularly in parliamentary systems, and dilutes the power of gerrymandering because it is not a one-to-one in that way. And so you're not incentivized to draw the maps in BS ways. I'm considering it still point to Afton Bain, who's running in the Tennessee 7 special election. Great candidate, signed on to American Demands platform. She has been posting a lot about, she keeps referring to her district as one that's drawn with a crayon, because it has been just deliberately drawn to try to cut out certain parts of Nashville, but to include certain parts of Nashville so that the people in those parts of Nashville are diluted by more rural areas. And so I think that the depth of the problem here goes way beyond, and there's so many other issues with our elections. There's been so many attempts to disenfranchise, particularly people of color in this country, not just through gerrymandering, but also through restrictions on people who can vote with certain convictions. And so I think that we cannot take our right to vote for granted. And I think we live in a country where voter turnout is really low. And that's something that we're constantly battling against. And so when we have politicians some of this is systemic and things that individuals can't do anything about and political candidates can't do anything about. But I do think that point number 3 is focusing on turnout in these elections is really the only way to overcome these improperly drawn districts, because they are improperly drawn, but they're drawn off of likely voters. And so when people show up to vote who have not historically been likely to show up to vote, who the map drawers don't expect are going to show up to vote, that can still really tilt. In Tennessee 7, I think that's what the campaign is super focused on, is that how do we get people who have not historically voted, who we know are going to vote for Afton, not just as a Democrat, but as somebody that's running on affordability. I think her tagline is feed kids, fund hospitals, fix roads. And I think that really driving turnout in that way is the only way that individual people can really impact or restrict the impacts of gerrymandering. And so to that end, you mentioned the New Jersey gubernatorial election with Mikey Sherrill. There's also, I know, an election in Virginia for the governor's seat, as well as perhaps for, I think, their House of Delegates as well, which could impact whether or not Virginia redraws its maps. And if it does redraw its maps, which party those maps favor. And then I think the last kind of call to action for our viewers going into next week for election week is that the New York mayoral is not locked up. There's a ton of money that's being dumped into the New York mayoral on the side of Andrew Cuomo, very late breaking. And I think that making sure, if you are a viewer in California, New Jersey, Virginia, or New York City, that you are early voting and that you are getting that ballot cast is really, really, really important. And so, Tiara, what do you think about as an elected official, as you're approaching, election years or watching other states' election years? What kind of considerations do electeds now have as people have gotten more and more brazen about messing with people's access to the ballot box?
Well, one of the things that immediately comes up to me is a lot of people that I talk to, they're like, well, my vote doesn't count. And I have to remind people that so many of the decisions that we have disappeared as part of how the world works is actually decided more often than not at the hyper local, at the local, and at the state level. These are decisions made by your state legislatures and your city council members that make your life easier or not. And we have conditioned people to believe that everything in their life is just set up and will always be that way. That is not the case. And I want to make sure that as you were talking about low voter turnout, and I think the reason, and one of the reasons that I talk to people all the time on the doors they do not turn out for, is they don't see leaders who are actually fighting for things and articulating what will change in their life. I live in a constitutionally protected gerrymandered district to preserve a Black majority in Providence, Rhode Island. I am the only state senator who is a Black woman that represents a historically Black and protected Black district in the state of Rhode Island. And I do not take that position for granted. My district also is drawn with a crayon. It looks like a weird dinosaur, and it slithers through parts of Providence because of the legacy of urban renewal, which cut apart a historically Black neighborhood. And so there's a tiny sliver that connects parts of my district. And when I talk to people about the things that I fight for, they're like, well, my wages are too low. Your minimum wage can be determined at the state level. And since I've been in the General Assembly, my first year, 2021, we passed a law to raise the minimum wage to $15. Last year, we passed another bill to pass a minimum wage up to $17. Now, that is nowhere near enough to meet the minimum requirement for Rhode Islanders to be able to afford housing at 30% of their income and a host of other things. But those are decisions that we've made at the local level, at the state level, to be able to give people a chance to be able to afford their lives. And I think when you were talking about Afton's platform, build roads, fund hospitals, those are the things that people need to be talking about. And those are the things that people need to see connected as decisions that leaders can make and or decisions that leaders have not made. So many people across this country are going to go uncontested in their races at the local and at the state level because people do not believe that they have the tools in order to make decisions about their communities. Most elected officials do not read, do not follow policy, are not paying attention to national headlines. At the back of my head every single day is also the news of SNAP benefits not reaching Americans this Saturday on November 1st. And one of the things that I want to make sure people know, there are people who are champions who are fighters, people with real experience like mine who know what it's like to rely on EBT or SNAP, as it is now called, in order to make ends meet. People who know what it's like to live in subsidized housing or to have rent stabilized units, who should be running for office but don't see themselves as champions of issues because they don't know enough. I can guarantee you, as someone who works in the legislature with other elected officials who don't know a single person who is looking at the November 1st day of not getting any of their benefits with horror and anxiety, and knowing that they will likely be looking at the face of their children or their elderly parents who do not have food on their table. Those are the people who should be running for office. Those are the people who know what it's like to be a real American who's experienced the downfalls and the pitfalls of what it means to be an American lost to the systems. And so as we go into election season, really do your due diligence, if you have the time, to look at some of those local races, see if they have an Instagram. If they don't, or a website, that's a telltale sign that they are not a serious elected. And you should start meeting with your neighbors to figure out who is going to run for them. It doesn't have to be you, but you can find that person, support their campaign, and knock on doors. Also, getting people registered to vote. There are so many things happening in people's lives that prevent them from prioritizing going to the ballot box or even having that day on their radar. Many states don't have Election Day as a holiday. Many companies and organizations don't allow their workers to take time off to go and vote. Lots of states don't have election days or options for voting on weekends. These are all things that you can champion in the next legislative year for your elected officials, making sure there's options for Saturdays, making sure there's extended early voting options and mail options, and getting your neighbors to realize that these dates and decisions and the people in power do have the power and ability to change their lives with a little bit of people power. And so as we wrap up this episode, because I know we have a little bit more, one of the things that has given me hope is, yes, there are people showing up every day. I don't live in New York, I'm in Rhode Island. But I've gotten text messages asking me to show up for Zoran in New York. I've been paying attention to the folks in California who are going to be voting on their maps ahead of the November 4th deadline. And that gives me hope that people are paying attention and they are not taking the attempted power grab by the GOP and by President Trump ahead of this election. There is a reason why Adelita has not been confirmed, and it's because they don't want to give power to the Democrats in order to fight back against this administration. So there's power in numbers, there's power in the people, and staying as informed and updated as possible, even when the news is not heartwarming, is how we fight back and how we make sure that we do not lose our very fragile democracy. So thanks for joining us, Praggies. We will have another episode for you this week, and we look forward to updating you on all of the horrors, but all of the joys possible in this world that we're building together.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.